I'm Edith, 35 female. I live in a quiet two-bedroom apartment that doubles as my office, a sanctuary of organized calm in a bustling city. As an independent management consultant, my days are a carefully structured mix of deep focus analysis, high-stakes video conferences, and meticulous report writing. My world is one of deadlines, data, and deliverables, and I've worked tirelessly to build a successful practice from the ground up. This success, however, came with a hidden cost. It turned me into the unofficial and deeply underappreciated financial pillar for my entire family. They saw my home office not as a place of work, but as a sign of infinite availability, and my income not as the result of hard labor, but as a bottomless well from which they could freely draw. This is the story of how I finally taught them the real value of my time and money, a lesson that began with a ridiculous request to dog sit and ended with me shutting down the family bank for good. It wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming the respect I had earned but was never given. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. For the last 5 years, my life had operated on two parallel tracks. On one track, I was Edith Vance, consultant. I advised C-suite executives on multi-million-dollar restructuring projects. I navigated complex corporate politics, streamlined inefficient workflows, and commanded a fee that reflected my expertise and the value I brought to my clients. My work was demanding, requiring intense concentration and absolute professionalism. A single misstep, a poorly phrased email, or a missed deadline could have significant financial and reputational consequences. My clients paid for my undivided attention, and I made sure they got it. My home office, with its ergonomic chair, triple monitor setup, and sound-canceling headphones, was my command center. It was a space I had designed for peak productivity, a fortress against distraction. On the other track, I was just Edith, daughter to Molly, older sister to Laura. In their world, my fortress of productivity didn't exist. My work wasn't real because it didn't involve a commute, a physical office, or a boss breathing down my neck. To them, working from home was a synonym for doing nothing important. This perception wasn't just an annoying quirk, it was the foundation of our family's financial structure. Because my work wasn't real, my time was considered infinitely flexible and my income perpetually accessible. It started subtly. A few years after I went independent and my income stabilized, my mother, Molly, retired. She hadn't saved enough, a fact she lamented with a sigh followed by, "It's just so hard to get by these days." I stepped in, of course. I started by covering her monthly utility bills. Then it was her car insurance. Soon, I was paying for her groceries and giving her a monthly allowance for incidentals. Each time, it was framed as a temporary help, but temporary became permanent. I loved my mother, and I felt a duty to ensure she was comfortable in her retirement. But my contributions were never acknowledged as a significant sacrifice or a result of my hard work. It was just what Edith did. When she'd call in the middle of my workday to chat for an hour about a neighborhood dispute or a sale at the department store, I'd try to gently cut it short. "Mom, I'm in the middle of a project," I'd say. Her response was always the same. "Oh, honey, just take a little break. It's not like you have to clock in and out." My sister, Laura, was a different story. At 27, she was a freelance photographer with a vibrant social life and an Instagram feed full of artistic shots and smiling friends. She was talented, I'll give her that, but her income was sporadic and unpredictable. Yet her lifestyle wasn't. She lived in a trendy downtown apartment I'd co-signed for, drove a car for which I'd paid the down payment, and was always dressed in the latest fashions. The financial gap was filled by me. "Edith, can you spot me for rent this month? I have a big check coming, I swear," was a text I received almost quarterly. Or, "My camera lens broke. It's an emergency. Can you help?" These requests were never small, and they were always framed with an urgency that made me feel guilty for even hesitating. The interruptions were the worst part. They were a constant, dripping tap of disrespect. Laura had a key to my apartment for emergencies, but her definition of an emergency was incredibly broad. She'd let herself in without warning, usually because she was in the neighborhood and needed a place to just chill for a bit between photo shoots. One afternoon, I was on a crucial video call with Anthony, the COO of a tech firm that was my biggest client. We were discussing the final stages of a massive logistics overhaul. My fee for this project alone was enough to cover my family's expenses for a year. Mid-sentence, while I was explaining a complex data point, my office door flew open. It was Laura, holding up 2 different dresses. "Quick, which one for tonight?" she whisper-shouted, completely oblivious to the man on my screen whose eyes had widened in surprise. I muted my microphone, my face burning with humiliation. "Laura, I am on a call with a client," I hissed, gesturing wildly at my screen. She just rolled her eyes. "Oh, relax, it's a video call, not brain surgery, just point." I felt a surge of pure rage. I pointed at the door, my expression leaving no room for argument. She huffed, muttered, "Fine, be like that," and sauntered out, leaving the door wide open. I unmuted myself, apologizing profusely to Anthony. He was gracious, of course, a true professional. "No problem at all, Edith. Family is family." But the damage was done. My carefully cultivated image of a polished, unflappable consultant had been shattered in an instant. I felt like a child who couldn't control her own home. The incident was a stark reminder of the chasm between how the professional world saw me and how my own family did. To my clients, I was a valued expert. To my family, I was a utility, always on, always available, and easily taken for granted. They benefited from the fruits of my labor but refused to acknowledge the labor itself. They saw the lifestyle my income afforded them, but they were willfully blind to the focus, discipline, and stress required to maintain it. I was the provider, the safety net, the ever-present ATM, but I was completely unseen. And I was beginning to realize that this arrangement was not just unsustainable. It was slowly eroding my sense of self-worth. The tipping point, the moment the deep, simmering resentment finally boiled over, wasn't a huge financial ask or a catastrophic interruption. It was something small, something that on the surface seemed almost trivial. It was a request to dog sit. But it was the context, the casual entitlement, and the utter dismissal of my professional life that made it the final straw. It was a Tuesday morning. I was neck-deep in preparation for a quarterly review with Anthony's company. This was a critical meeting where I would present my findings and strategic recommendations. The presentation deck needed to be flawless, the data irrefutable, and my delivery confident. I had blocked out the entire week on my calendar, labeling it "Do Not Disturb, Prep Week." I had even sent a text to my mom and sister. "Hey, just a heads up, I have a massive client presentation on Friday, so I'm going to be completely off the grid this week. Please only call for a true emergency." It was a boundary I'd tried to set before, with limited success, but this time I was determined to enforce it. On Wednesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Laura. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, a call came through. I let it go to voicemail, my jaw tightening. A minute later, a new text appeared. "EDITH, pick up, it's important." My stomach clenched. What now? Had something happened to Mom? Was it a real emergency? With a heavy sigh, I pushed my chair back and called her. "What's wrong?" I asked, my tone clipped. "Oh my God, finally?" Laura's voice was a gust of frantic energy. "You'll never guess what happened. I got this incredible last-minute opportunity to go to Aspen for a 4-day shoot. It's for a luxury skiwear brand. This could be huge for my portfolio." I felt a wave of relief, quickly followed by irritation. "Laura, that's great, but you said it was important. I'm in the middle of my prep week." "This is important," she insisted. "The flight leaves tomorrow morning. It's all very sudden, and I need a huge favor. I need you to watch Zeus." Zeus was Laura's dog, a hyperactive Siberian husky who was as beautiful as he was destructive. He required constant attention, long walks, and a vigilant eye to prevent him from chewing on everything from shoes to drywall. The thought of having him in my meticulously organized apartment, especially this week, was a nightmare. "No," I said flatly. "I can't. I told you I have to focus on this presentation. It's critical. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a disbelieving laugh. You're kidding, right? Edith, it's just watching a dog. You work from home, you're literally there all day. It's not like I'm asking you to do any actual work. The words hit me like a slap in the face. It's not like I'm asking you to do any actual work. She had just dismissed my entire career, the very career that was funding her trendy apartment and her emergency camera lenses, as if it were a hobby. The condescension in her voice was staggering. Laura, my work is actual work, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. It requires silence and 100% of my concentration. I have a 3-hour presentation to finalize for a client who pays me more in 1 quarter than you make in a year. I cannot have a dog here. Find a kennel or ask one of your friends. A kennel? Are you serious? She scoffed. They're so expensive, and all my friends are busy, they have real jobs to go to. There it was again. The implication that I was the only one with a fake job, the only one whose time had no value. The injustice of it all, the years of my hard work being treated as a joke while they cashed the checks, made something inside me snap. My job is real, Laura, I seethed. My job is what paid your security deposit. My job is what paid for your last emergency root canal. My job is the reason you're not drowning in debt, so don't you dare tell me it's not real work. Wow, okay? Her voice turned cold and wounded, a classic manipulation tactic. I didn't realize helping your sister was such a horrible burden. I just thought you'd be happy for my career opportunity. But I guess you love your precious projects more than your family. You know, Mom's been saying you've been acting so distant lately. Too good for us now that you're making big money. This was her go-to move, turning her entitlement into my failure as a family member. For years, it had worked. The guilt would eat at me and I would cave. But this time was different. Her words didn't inspire guilt, they ignited a cold, hard fury. They weren't just insulting, they were a revelation. She didn't just misunderstand my work, she actively disdained it. She saw me as a resource, not a person. Find another solution for your dog, Laura, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. My answer is no. Do not call me again this week unless the house is on fire. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking. I stood in the middle of my office, the half-finished presentation glowing on my monitors, and felt the foundations of my life shift. The years of resentment, of biting my tongue, of quietly wiring money while being openly disrespected, had coalesced into a single, clarifying thought: I was done. This wasn't a family, it was a parasitic relationship, and I was the host. The favor wasn't just a favor, it was a symptom of a disease that had festered for far too long. And for the first time, I felt a powerful, undeniable urge to find a cure. My presentation wasn't just about corporate restructuring anymore. It was about my own. After the call with Laura, I was too agitated to work. The audacity, the sheer, unadulterated entitlement, echoed in my mind. I paced my apartment, a storm of anger and hurt brewing inside me. I had to get back to my presentation, but my focus was shattered. To calm my nerves, I decided to do something mundane, something physical to clear my head. I started cleaning out my email inbox, deleting old newsletters and spam. That's when I noticed a new voicemail notification on my phone. I had missed it in the flurry of Laura's texts and calls. It was from my mother, Molly. My first instinct was to ignore it. I assumed it was Laura's second wave of attack. She had probably called Mom immediately after I hung up, painted me as the villain, and sent her in as backup. I braced myself for a guilt trip, a lecture on the importance of family and how I was being selfish. But curiosity, and a small, foolish flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, Mom would be on my side, made me press play. The voicemail started as expected. "Edith, honey, it's me," Molly's voice began, sounding weary. "Laura just called me and she was very upset. She told me you wouldn't watch Zeus for her. Here it comes," I thought, clenching my fists. But then the message took an unexpected turn. There was a pause, a rustling sound, and then Molly's voice changed. It became muffled, as if she were talking to someone else in the room and had forgotten to end the call. She hadn't hung up. She was having a conversation, and my phone was recording every word. I don't know what to do with her, Laura, my mother sighed. It was clear she was now speaking directly to my sister, who must have been with her. She's just being so difficult lately. Laura's voice, sharp and petulant, cut through. Difficult? Mom, she's impossible. She hung up on me. All I did was ask for a tiny favor. It's not like she does anything all day but stare at her computer. She's so selfish. I bet her fancy client is more important to her than her own sister's career. My blood ran cold. I sank into my office chair, holding the phone to my ear as if it were a lifeline to a truth I had long suspected, but never wanted to confirm. Now, let's not be like that, Molly placated, but her tone was weak, lacking any real defense of me. You know how she gets about her work. We just have to be smart about it. Smart about what? Laura snapped. It's ridiculous. We have to walk on eggshells around her just to get her to part with a little bit of her money. It's not fair, SH. E has so much, and we're struggling. You'd think she'd be happy to help the family that raised her. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. The family that raised her? I had been financially independent since I graduated college. I was the one helping raise her standard of living. Then came the part that shattered my world. I know, sweetie, I know, Molly soothed. But we have to play the game. You know the plan. We just need to keep things smooth until she helps us with the down payment for your photography studio. Anthony said we need at least $50,000 saved up. My breath hitched. Down payment? Photography studio? Anthony? It took me a second to realize she wasn't talking about my client. She was talking about Anthony, Laura's on-again, off-again boyfriend, a musician with big dreams and an even bigger aversion to stable employment. They had a plan. A plan that apparently involved me funding a $50,000 business venture I had never even heard about. Laura whined, but how are we supposed to do that when she's in a mood like this? She'll say no just to be spiteful. She won't, Molly said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made my stomach turn. I'll handle her. I'll call her later and tell her how worried I am about my old car. Mention a few strange noises, maybe a high repair estimate. She'll offer to help me get a new one. Once she's feeling generous and guilty, that's when you bring up the studio again. Frame it as an investment in your future. She's a sucker for that investment talk, and she'll never say no to her poor old mother. The phone clicked, the voicemail ended. I sat in stunned silence, the recording replaying in my head. We have to play the game. She's a sucker for that investment talk. She'll never say no to her poor old mother. It wasn't just a lack of respect. It was a calculated, long-term deception. They weren't just taking advantage of my generosity, they were actively scheming to manipulate me. They viewed me not as a daughter or a sister, but as a mark. A resource to be managed and exploited. Every emergency, every sob story, every guilt trip. How much of it had been part of the plan? The worry about the car, the broken camera lens, the rent shortfalls. It was all a carefully orchestrated performance designed to extract as much money from me as possible. The hurt was immense, a physical ache in my chest. These were the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, but the anger was greater. It was a clean, purifying fire that burned away all the guilt, all the obligation, all the misplaced family loyalty. They had made a critical miscalculation. They assumed the woman who worked tirelessly to build a successful career was the same gullible, soft-hearted person they could easily manipulate. They saw my kindness as a weakness. They were about to learn it was simply a choice I was no longer willing to make. The game they were playing was over. I was about to write a new set of rules. The accidental confession wasn't just a wake-up call, it was a declaration of war. My initial shock and hurt quickly hardened into a cold, methodical resolve. They thought my work was a game? Fine. I would use the very skills they disdained, analysis, strategy, and meticulous documentation, to dismantle the system of dependence they had built around me. My project for Anthony's company was about streamlining operations and cutting out inefficiencies. I realized, with grim irony, that I needed to apply the same principles to my own life. The first step was to understand the full scope of the problem. I needed data. For years, I had transferred money, paid bills, and covered expenses without ever really tracking the total amount. Each transaction was treated as a one-off event, a singular act of generosity. But now, I needed to see the complete picture. I needed to calculate the true cost of my family. For the rest of the day, I abandoned my client presentation. My new project was Project Severance. I opened a fresh spreadsheet, the clean grid a stark contrast to the mess of my personal life. I logged into my online banking portal and started going back, month by month, year by year, for the past 5 years. Every wire transfer to Molly, every Venmo payment to Laura for groceries or gas, every credit card bill I'd paid off for them, every direct payment to a landlord, an insurance company, or a car mechanic. The numbers were staggering. It was like peeling back the layers of a rotten onion, each one revealing a more sickening truth. I color-coded the entries: blue for Mom's living expenses, green for Laura's emergencies and lifestyle subsidies, and red for cash gifts for birthdays and holidays that were far more extravagant than what I ever spent on myself. The small, seemingly insignificant amounts were the most insidious. The $50 here for a nice dinner out for Mom, the $100 there for Laura's art supplies. They added up with terrifying speed, but the big items told a story of escalating audacity. There was the $5,000 down payment on Laura's car, the $3,000 to cover a mysterious credit card debt she'd racked up, the consistent $1,500 a month I sent Molly, which I now realized was far more than she needed for basic living expenses. Where was all that extra money going? As I dug deeper, I found a charge from 2 years ago on a joint credit card I shared with my mother for emergencies. It was a $2,500 charge to a resort in Cancun. I called her at the time, and she had a ready-made story. "Oh, honey, my card must have been compromised. I'll call the bank right away and dispute it." I had believed her, of course. Now, with the voicemail echoing in my ears, I felt a surge of nausea. I cross-referenced the date with Laura's Instagram feed. And there it was. A sunny picture of her and her boyfriend, Anthony, clinking margarita glasses on a beach. The caption read, "Best surprise birthday trip ever, my mom is the greatest." My mom, using my money to fund my sister's vacation, then lying to my face about it. By the time I finished, after hours of painstaking data entry, the final number stared back at me from the bottom of the spreadsheet. Over the last 5 years, I had given my mother and sister a combined total of $287,450. I leaned back in my chair, the breath knocked out of me. It was more than a down payment on a house. It was a college education. It was a comfortable retirement fund. It was a fortune I had earned through countless sleepless nights, stressful negotiations, and weekends spent working while they were out living lives I was unknowingly bankrolling. And what did I get in return? Disrespect, manipulation, and a plan to squeeze another $50,000 out of me for a photography studio that would likely never turn a profit. This spreadsheet wasn't just a financial record, it was an invoice. It was a detailed accounting of my own foolishness, but it was also the most powerful tool I now possessed. The numbers didn't lie. They told a story of exploitation that was irrefutable. My family had treated my generosity like an unlimited resource. They failed to understand a fundamental business principle I applied every day in my work. Resources are finite, and every investment must have a return. My investment in them had yielded nothing but negative returns. My anger was no longer hot and chaotic. It was cold, precise, and strategic. I saved the spreadsheet, password protecting the file. This document would be my shield and my sword. They wanted to play the game. They had no idea who they were playing against. The consultant they dismissed as someone who just stares at a computer all day was about to give them a masterclass in consequences. Phase 1, the investigation, was complete. Phase 2, the plan, was about to begin. The days of the unseen provider were over. The era of accountability was about to dawn. With the damning evidence compiled in my spreadsheet, my path forward became crystal clear. A simple no was no longer sufficient. A dramatic confrontation would be satisfying in the short term, but ultimately unproductive. They would twist my words, play the victim, and the cycle would continue. No, this situation required a corporate solution, a complete and total restructuring of our family's financial operations. I named the strategy Operation Financial Freedom. My freedom, that is. The plan had 3 distinct phases designed to be executed with the precision of a corporate takeover. Phase 1, Asset Protection. Phase 2, Communication Rollout. Phase 3, the final meeting. Phase 1, Asset Protection began immediately. My first move was to secure my own finances. I spent the next morning making a series of swift, decisive changes. I opened a new set of checking and savings accounts at a completely different bank. I then initiated a transfer of the vast majority of my liquid assets to these new, secure accounts. I left only enough in my old accounts to cover my own automated bill payments for the next month. This was crucial. It created a firewall. Next, I tackled the shared lines of credit. I called the credit card company and reported the emergency card I shared with Molly as lost, effective immediately. I requested a new card with a new number be sent only to me. When the customer service agent asked if I wanted to add any authorized users, I replied with a firm, "No, thank you." I then went online and removed myself as the cosigner from Laura's apartment lease. This was a bit more complicated and required a formal letter to the leasing office, but my contract allowed me to do so with 30 days' notice. I informed them that as of the end of the next month, I would no longer be financially responsible for the property. Laura would have to requalify on her own income, which I knew was impossible. Finally, I logged into my mother's utility accounts, electricity, water, internet, all of which I had been paying directly. I removed my payment information and restored the billing to her name and address. The bills would now go to her, in her mailbox. Each click of the mouse, each phone call, felt like building a wall. I wasn't just moving money, I was reclaiming my autonomy. For years, my financial life had been entangled with theirs, a messy web of shared responsibility where I was the only one holding up my end. Now, I was methodically untangling every thread. It was a quiet, bloodless coup executed from the same home office they so openly disdained. By lunchtime, I was, for the first time in 5 years, the sole controller of my financial destiny. The Bank of Edith was officially closed for business. Phase 2, Communication Rollout, was about managing the narrative. I couldn't just cut them off without explanation. They would create their own story, one in which I was the cruel, heartless villain. I needed to preemptively frame the situation in a way that was professional, non-negotiable, and left no room for emotional manipulation. I drafted 2 separate emails, one for Molly and one for Laura. The tone was not that of a hurt daughter or an angry sister, but of a financial advisor communicating a change in terms. To my mother, the email was gentle but firm. I wrote, "Subject, important update regarding financial support. Hi, Mom. I'm writing to let you know about some changes I'm making to my financial planning. After a thorough review of my long-term goals, my financial advisor has recommended a significant restructuring of my budget to prioritize my retirement and investment accounts. As a result, starting immediately, I will no longer be able to provide the monthly financial support I have in the past. I understand this will be a significant adjustment, so I have made sure all your household bills for the current month are paid in full. Going forward, you will be responsible for these expenses. I've attached a list of resources for seniors on a fixed income that might be helpful. This was not an easy decision, but it is a necessary one for my future. I love you. Edith." The email to Laura was more direct. Subject, Financial Update. Hi, Laura. I'm making some necessary changes to my financial portfolio. Effective immediately, I will no longer be in a position to provide you with discretionary financial assistance. This includes loans, bill payments, and other forms of support. Additionally, I have notified your apartment's leasing office that I am removing myself as guarantor on your lease at the end of the 30-day notice period. You will need to speak with them directly about how to proceed. I wish you the best in your career and financial endeavors.
Edith.
I reread both emails. They were perfect. They were cold, corporate, and utterly devoid of the emotion they were used to exploiting. Using the financial advisor fiction provided a layer of impersonal authority. It shifted the decision from a personal slight to a practical necessity. I hit send on both emails simultaneously. Then, I blocked both of their numbers on my phone. They could respond via email if they chose, but the days of frantic, guilt-inducing phone calls were over. Communication would now be on my terms, in writing. Phase 3, the final meeting, was the endgame. I knew the emails would trigger a firestorm. They would be confused, then angry, then desperate. I anticipated they would show up at my apartment unannounced. I had to be ready. I printed a copy of my spreadsheet, The True Cost of Family, all 6 pages of it. I placed it in a neat folder on my desk, right next to a printed copy of the emails I had just sent. This was my evidence, my closing argument. I spent the rest of the afternoon finally working on my presentation for Anthony. And as I immersed myself in the familiar world of data and strategy, a sense of profound calm washed over me. I had taken control. I had a plan. They thought I didn't have a real job. They were about to discover just how professional I could be. The confrontation was coming, but for the first time, I wouldn't be on the defensive. I would be running the meeting. The fallout was faster and more furious than I could have imagined. Less than an hour after I sent the emails, my doorbell began buzzing insistently, a frantic, angry sound that shattered the peace of my apartment. I ignored it. Then came the pounding on the door, punctuated by my sister's enraged shouts. "Edith, open this door right now. I know you're in there." I looked through the peephole. It was both of them, Laura and Molly, their faces contorted with fury and disbelief. Laura was red-faced, vibrating with anger, while my mother stood behind her looking pale and bewildered, clutching her phone as if it had personally betrayed her. This was it, the final meeting. I took a deep breath, straightened my blouse, and walked over to my desk. I picked up the folder containing my spreadsheet and the printed emails. With my evidence in hand, I walked to the door, unlocked it, and opened it just wide enough to block their entry. I stood on the threshold, creating a physical barrier that mirrored the financial one I had just erected. "What is the meaning of those emails?" Laura screeched, trying to push past me. I held my ground, placing a firm hand on the doorframe. "My emails were self-explanatory," I said, my voice calm and steady. It was the same tone I used with difficult clients. "I have restructured my finances." "Restructured your finances?" Molly finally spoke, her voice trembling. "What does that even mean?" "Edith, my utilities, my car insurance. How am I supposed to pay for those? My Social Security doesn't cover all of that." "That is something you will need to figure out," I replied, looking directly at her. "You'll have to create a budget, just like everyone else." "Create a budget?" Laura laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "She can't create a budget. You're the one with all the money. You're supposed to take care of us. It's what family does." "Is it?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Is manipulating your daughter and sister for her money what family does? Is playing the game to squeeze a $50,000 down payment out of me what family does?" The color drained from my mother's face. Laura's jaw dropped, her angry tirade cut short. They stared at me, speechless. The silence was my confirmation. "Oh, you look surprised," I continued, my voice dripping with ice. "Did you think I didn't hear you? Did you think I didn't listen to the voicemail, Mom? The one where you and Laura laid out your entire strategy. How you'd pretend your car was failing to make me feel guilty, so I'd be more open to funding Laura's investment." Molly looked like she was going to faint. "Voicemail? I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" I opened the folder and pulled out the spreadsheet. I held up the front page, the bolded grand total of $287,450 facing them. "Let's talk about what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this. This is what my not real work has paid for over the last 5 years. This is your lifestyle. This is your rent, your cars, your vacations, your emergencies." I'd call it an investment, but investments are supposed to provide a return. The only return I've gotten is disrespect, and a conspiracy to defraud me of another $50,000. I flipped through the pages, my finger jabbing at specific line items. Remember this, Laura? A broken camera lens for $2,200. Or this, Mom? A $2,500 charge to a resort in Cancun that you swore was credit card fraud, while Laura posted pictures of her surprise trip from you. Laura stared at the papers, her face a mask of horror. She had no defense. The data was irrefutable. You thought because I work from this apartment that my life was an open book, that my time and money were public resources, I said, my voice rising with years of suppressed frustration. You laughed at my career, interrupted my meetings, and dismissed my professional life, all while holding your hands out for the money it generated. You saw a provider, not a person. An ATM, not a sister. A bank, not a daughter. I looked at Molly, whose eyes were now filled with tea. Ours, but they were tears of self-pity, not remorse. You taught her this, I said quietly. You taught her that my success was her entitlement. You orchestrated this. I was just trying to help your sister, she cried. She has dreams. You're so successful, I thought you want to help. Help is offered, not schemed for, I retorted. And it is met with gratitude, not condescension. You don't get to mock the source of the water while you're drinking from the well. Well, the well is dry. The bank is closed. The services you have enjoyed are hereby terminated. Laura finally found her voice, but it was no longer filled with rage. It was laced with panic. Edith, please, she stammered. My apartment, I'll be evicted. I can't afford it on my own. Then I suggest you find one you can afford, I said, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. Or perhaps your boyfriend Anthony can help. Since you were planning a business with him, surely he has some capital. The finality in my voice must have been clear. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a verdict. I had presented my evidence, made my case, and delivered my judgment. There was nothing more to say. The changes are not up for discussion, I stated. They are final. You will receive no more financial support from me. Do not call me, do not text me, and do not come to my home again. With that, I stepped back inside, and before they could utter another word, I closed the door in their faces. I leaned against it, listening to their shocked silence, which was soon replaced by my mother's quiet sobs and Laura's frantic, whispered curses. I didn't feel triumph, not yet. I just felt a profound, hollow sense of release. The storm had broken. The confrontation I had dreaded for years was over. And I had not just survived it, I had won. The silence that followed the closing of my door was unlike any I had ever experienced. It wasn't just the absence of their shouting. It was the absence of obligation, of expectation, of the constant, low-level hum of resentment that had been the background noise of my life for years. In the first few days, I braced myself for another assault. I expected emails filled with pleas, apologies, or renewed anger. None came. It seemed the finality of my presentation, backed by the undeniable data of the spreadsheet, had left them with nothing to say. Their primary tool, emotional manipulation, was useless against cold, hard facts. The first tangible proof of my new reality came a week later. I was in the middle of my big presentation with Anthony and his team. For 3 uninterrupted hours, I laid out my strategy, answered complex questions, and defended my recommendations. I was sharp, focused, and completely in my element. There were no surprise visitors, no frantic calls, no domestic dramas pulling at my attention. At the end of the call, Anthony smiled, a genuine expression of respect. Edith, that was outstanding. Exactly what we needed. We're implementing your strategy effective immediately. Send us the invoice. It was the most successful presentation of my career, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that it was because I had been able to give it my all, free from the mental and emotional weight of my family's demands. Life began to change in small, wonderful ways. My grocery bills went down because I was only buying for one. I looked at my bank account at the end of the month and saw a surplus that was truly my own. The first thing I did with that found money wasn't to buy something extravagant, but to make a massive, extra payment to my own retirement fund, the very fund I had claimed my advisor was so concerned about. It felt like the ultimate act of self-care, an investment in my own future for the first time in a long time. About a month later, I received a forwarded email from my old apartment building's management company. It was a notice addressed to Laura, informing her of eviction proceedings due to non-payment of rent. A part of me felt a brief, faint twinge of something, not guilt, but a ghost of the old, conditioned responsibility. I quickly dismissed it. Her situation was a direct consequence of her own actions and choices. I was not responsible. I deleted the email. A few weeks after that, I was talking to a cousin who mentioned she'd seen my mom. "She seems stressed," my cousin said carefully. "She's taken a part-time job as a cashier at the local grocery store, said she needed to make ends meet." I simply nodded and said, "I hope it works out for her." My cousin, sensing a deeper story she didn't have the details for, wisely changed the subject. My mother, who hadn't worked in years and felt it was beneath her, was now learning the value of $1 in the most direct way possible. I never heard from Laura directly again. Through the family grapevine, I heard she had moved in with her boyfriend, Anthony, into his tiny, cramped apartment across town. The dream of the $50,000 photography studio had evaporated, replaced by the harsh reality of a life not subsidized by my income. I heard she was struggling to find consistent work, now that she couldn't afford the networking events and high-end gear she had once taken for granted. 6 months after the day the bank closed, I sold my apartment and bought a small house with a yard in a quieter part of the city. It had a dedicated office with a large window overlooking a garden I was learning to cultivate. The extra money that once flowed to my family was now invested in my home, my business, and myself. I was sleeping better. I was more productive. I was happier. One afternoon, while I was potting a new plant on my porch, a car that looked suspiciously like my mother's old, unreliable sedan drove slowly down my street. It paused in front of my new house for a long moment. I couldn't see the driver clearly, but I knew it was her. I didn't wave. I didn't hide. I just continued with my gardening, my hands in the soil. After a moment, the car drove on. It was a silent acknowledgement. She knew where I was, and she knew she wasn't welcome. The boundary was holding. My life wasn't just financially richer, it was emotionally richer, too. I had more time and energy for my friendships, for my health, for my hobbies. I had learned the hardest lesson of my life, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from the people who refuse to see your worth. They had accused me of loving my money more than my family, but they were wrong. I had simply decided to love myself, my work, and my future more than their toxic, one-sided definition of family. The silence they left behind wasn't empty. It was peaceful. It was productive. It was the sound of a life that was finally, completely, my own. It was the sound of freedom.